Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us to the virtual roundtable series that are taking place every 2 weeks of the Platinum community. Before we start, I would like to inform you that all attendees will have their cameras turned off and their microphones muted. Before finishing, panelists will give a space for questions using the question and answer tool located at the bottom of the screen. Today's topic is about remittances, a discussion on the latest volume data. We are very honored to have as moderator Hugo Cuevas-Mohr, Director of the Platinum Network, Cruz, Vargas, Peanut Growth Advisor, Michael Kent, founder of Azimo, and Gene Nigro, VP of Global Development, Remitly. I'm gonna turn off my camera and put my microphone muted so you can start, Hugo.
Okay, so good morning from Miami, good afternoon from London, and good night from the rest of the world. And a very early morning to Cruz, who's in the West Coast in San Diego. So thank you for joining us. We have a good number of people joining us today. I see a lot of names that I recognize here in the attendee list. So I'm glad that you're joining us. So we're just going to speak our minds. We are going to discuss remittances volumes. I have to say that this industry relies on data that is collected by the central banks, and central banks are coached by the World Bank for many years in how to collect the data for the industry, and that's the only data that we really have. But as I've been discussing with Cruz for the 2 or 3 weeks that he's been working with us at Peanut and More Consulting, there's so many holes in the data, and even the World Bank and the central banks, we know that they collect as much as they can, but a lot of left uncollected for many reasons that we're not going to discuss today. We're not going to discuss today whether we know that remittances is a portion of what any money transfer company, payment institutions, money transmitters, whatever you call them, digital or traditional, if we could collect information directly from those companies, the volume will probably maybe be twice or at least much more than is collected by the central bank. So that's the data that we have. So we're gonna build from that data, and we're going to try to discuss what we think is happening. I think that in the March and April, when this terrible pandemic started, we were very concerned, and everything gave indications that the drop was going to be large. We estimated 25–30% for the whole year. It has not happened totally. It has happened differently in different corridors. We're going to talk about that too. So that's why we're going to start with Cruz, who's going to give us some overview of data. He's going to share a presentation and give us some comments as he wants on the data that he collects. Then we're going to ask my friend and colleague Michael Kent, founder and CEO of Azimo, that he's going to be a perspective of more European, Africa, and Asia perspective and then we're going to go with Gene. Gene has been in the industry, has worked with many of the best digital companies in the market, and now with Remitly, he's going to give us his perception. We understand that, and we were talking before everybody got on, how digital companies have grown their probably their market share, but really have the increment in remittances through digital platforms is something that everybody's been talking about. even personally, I've talked to payers on the paying side, saying how they even have seen how these digital companies have grown tremendously, and even I am sure that in the growth prospects that every company had, maybe you're getting growth that you thought you were going to get in 2022 or 2023 or whatever. So that's just fine. We can talk about that, but really I want to concentrate in what's happening with remittances. Why some companies are what sort of corridors are growing, what is going on, and yes, we're going to speculate. It's a speculation based on our own particular place in the industry and our experience, and also because we always compare everything that is happening now with the crisis in 2007, 2008, which is totally different, I understand, but that's where we can refer to and what happened there. So Cruz, we are in your hands. Thank you for coming in and talking to us.
Hey, Hugo, thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, state of remittances.
Great, awesome. Let me just wait on the presentation to load here for a second.
So I see that you chose in Mexico, Philippines, and Guatemala.
You click share. You want to click.
Yeah, he's playing with his computer.
Couple more seconds here to load. Great, can you see my full screen?
Yes.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much for confirming. So like Google said, we're going to talk a little bit about what the central banks are reporting in terms of remittance data up until July. And we're going to do so for Mexico, Philippines, and Guatemala. And as Hugo mentioned, a little bit about me. I am a peanut advisor. We have 15 years of experience in the money transfer industry with having played roles in marketing and in customer experience, and even on the product side as well. And I just want to do a quick pitch here for the Platinum Network, where you can find professionals like me who have had experience in the industry, and we are within reach for you to bounce off ideas and or to provide advice and or share any thoughts on the industry itself. So we'll start off with Mexico. Let me see if we can get this out of the way. Here we go. We'll start off with Mexico. So what we're seeing here on green are the total remittances in millions of dollars from worldwide to Mexico. And in orange, we'll see the average transfer amount or the average transaction volume, depending on which acronym you typically use for this. But what we see in green is that for Mexico, ultimately we see an upward trend, right, over the years. And interesting to point out is sort of what happened shortly in the recession of 2008 and how we saw what many have considered sort of an atypical spike in October 2008. And it draws a lot of parallels to what we saw in March of 2020. And so I won't get too much into it, but we'll let our other experts chime in a little bit in more detail about this. But that's certainly sort of what we could probably consider abnormal activity, where the economy says, hey, we're tanking, or there's definitely a contraction, and yet we see a spike in remittances immediately during that period. So it's interesting to note that in particular for Mexico. And I'll move along, and so here, this is sort of an overlaid view. This is a month comparison, and if you see the three bottom rows are for 2008, 2009, and 2010. The blue, the gray, and the orange. And so what we wanted to note here is that after that spike in 2008, in October, when the recession happened, really the point here they wanted to drive across is that we saw a contraction in remittances, and for at least 2 years, the remittances fell below that period. And so in comparison, I wanted to show what had happened in 2018, 2019, and 2020. The orange line, the blue line, and the green line, with the green line being 2020. And so what we have seen in the last 3 years is that we had seen a stack growth, constant growth year over year in remittances to Mexico. And what we saw is sort of this, again, this abnormal spike in March specifically. Then we saw a dip in April. But yet overall, we see growth year over year. And so just interesting to note that. We'll let the discussion part of this kick in a little bit later, but we wanted to just share what the data and some patterns in the data we're seeing so far. We'll jump onto Philippines, and this is again the remittance trends for Philippines, as reported by the Central Bank of the Philippines. And what we'll see is again an upward trend generally over the years, constant upward trend. Up until the last couple of months or so, when we see a dip in February of 2020, followed by a couple more months in dip as well, and then a small uptick in July of 2020. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to overlay the year-over-year growth for this period to try to get some additional insights on this particular data. And so what we see here, what we would want to draw your attention to is the orange graph, and then on the y-axis to your right. So basically what we're looking for the orange line to be closer to 0 or closer to the middle, which would tell us that there's stagnant or no growth, right? And so what we see is that starting somewhere around in 2004, mid 2004, we start seeing some shows of decline, at least year over year. So prior to that, we're seeing 5 to 10% growth year over year in the Philippines, and we start seeing that sort of a little bit of contraction as well. And then very interesting in how the last couple of months we saw a significant dip, as far as 20% dip year over year in the Philippines. Then in the last month we saw a slight uptick of roughly around 5% or so. But definitely 20% drop year over year is certainly something to consider, to think about. And again, I won't go into detail about sort of the causes. We'll let the experts sort of talk about that. Of course, we will have our own theories, but I wanted to show that data. And so lastly, we'll move on to Guatemala and show the trends of Guatemala. Again, these are the monthly remittance in thousands of dollars to the United States. And again, we sort of see the sort of upward tick in remittances as well to Guatemala. Again, a dip in roughly somewhere between, we saw the dip in Mexico and Philippines roughly between February and April. And we see this here again as well, a significant dip in April of 2020. And then again, we start seeing the remittances go up again slightly. So we're seeing sort of this pattern between these three important countries of remittances. This is again another comparison by month for the last 5 years for Guatemala. And as we see again, we see here in Guatemala, you see the stacked graphs going year over year. We see that natural, but you see that growth in remittances year over year, with the exception of 2020, where again we see this dip, we see this slowdown for both March and April of this year, and in even May, which was sort of certainly unexpected for many of us in the industry. But then we start seeing that uptick again. And so what this data shows us so far in these three countries is that there was definitely some sensitivity during the initial period of the pandemic. And so we wanted just to close out with the last, with sort of an aggregate of the last 7 months of remittances, basically how we're doing year to date, if that makes sense, for these three countries, and to compare that as well. And so, so again, these are for Mexico in green, Philippines in red, and Guatemala in blue. And so what we see, this is a cumulative of remittances from January to July for the last 5 years. And so what we see in Mexico is that from January to July, we continue to see this uptick. Sure, there was a drop, but we certainly see an uptick. And Guatemala is relatively stable in the last 2 years, but very interestingly so for Philippines, this is the first year in the last 5 years or so that we have seen a contraction, that we have seen a dip in remittances. And so, so again, if you'd like to see more data like this, or if you'd like to learn more about that, we're accessible, not just me, but a handful of other professionals in the industry. We're available on PNET to speak with you. And for now, I will pass it back on to our panelists.
Thank you, Cruz. And this presentation will be available for download in the PNET community. We'll provide you the link to all of you who are here today. Of course, we have to understand that we chose those countries. We could have chosen others, but of course, Mexico depends mostly from the United States. That's the largest corridor in the world in remittances for some of our participants here. So Mexico, Guatemala depend on the United States. Philippines, not as much. By just out of memory, around 20% of the remittances from Philippines come from the United States. I just wanted to mention that just to add something to what Cruz said. But hey, Michael, tell us what is your take on this? You look at much more corridors from what Azimo does in the industry. So tell us what do you think? Give us some information and share with us your thoughts, your opinions on what's going on.
Sure. Thanks, Hugo. Great to be here. Great to see you again, Gene, and Cruz. Nice to meet you. And one of the best things about our industry is that when times are tough, and undoubtedly times are tough, times are tough across the whole economy. Everyone comes together, they share learnings, they talk to each other, and it's just, I know we fight very hard in the market, and we're very competitive, but we have a great relationship at a personal level. So yeah, great to be here and great to be talking about these very important issues. Undoubtedly, it's a tough time for our customers. It's a tough time for our staff, and it's a lot of uncertainty out there in the marketplace. So I always have a bit of a dispute with the World Bank numbers. I love Dilip dearly, but he's only got so much he can work with, and it's great that somebody is actually putting their neck out and issuing these numbers. But oftentimes we find ourselves with 100% plus market share if we were to take their numbers, and we're pretty sure that's not right. So there's obviously stuff that's difficult for the World Bank numbers, and I think I was talking with Matt Oppenheimer from Remitly a little while ago, and also Brian from World Remit. We kind of feel that the World Bank numbers were pretty bearish in the first place, but they are largely driven on balance of payments numbers and GDP expectations. And actually economic GDP indicators have not been quite as bad as people have been saying. It's been bad. Don't get me wrong. Actually, in the UK where we're based, we saw the largest decline in the size of the economy since 1700. So 300 years it took us to get to a situation as bad as the one we're seeing right now. But the economy has actually bounced back pretty fast, which is pretty positive. And for us, I think we've actually seen a big surge in volume. And now I know that's masking what is actually happening in the market. Particularly some of the Latin American corridors have done particularly well from Europe. We don't really do Mexico. I mean, we have a service to Mexico, but there's not many Mexicans in Europe. Most of the flow from Mexico is coming from North America. But places like Colombia, places like other countries in Brazil has been very strong. Other countries in South America have seen a really big increase for us. And we put that down largely to foreign exchange movements. So a lot of so I'll just tell you the narrative of what happened to us, and I think people might find it interesting. The pandemic hit. I think nobody was expecting the sort of speed of lockdown that happened. Certainly we weren't in Europe. We sent everyone home from the office, and we all sat in front of our computer screens, talked to each other on Zoom, and we were really worried about what was going to happen. And actually, we saw a really fast slowdown in our business. We saw a slowdown in customer transactions. We saw a slowdown in volumes. But actually, what was going on for us was because we send from Europe in euros predominantly and pounds, the pound and the euro fell very sharply, more than 10% against the US dollar. And that meant for my customers, it was becoming very expensive to send. A couple of weeks after that we saw that trend, and we were nervous. We were looking about, how far is this going to fall? What's going to happen next? We started to see a surge of volume, and actually that surge of volume is driven by new customers coming onto the platform and sending for the first time. And you can almost linearly track out across Europe where the lockdown happened and when it happened to when we started to see a big surge in the customer numbers. So it's hard for me to opine on the whole marketplace because as a digital player, we've been a net beneficiary of people not being able or willing to go to a traditional money transfer company, which, let's remember, in Europe at least is still the majority of the market, and looking for alternatives. So people are still trying to send. But I think, the impact of foreign exchange is huge. And actually what you've seen is, nearly every emerging currency has fallen against the dollar. And then more recently for us in the last month or so, the dollar's actually performed really badly as well. And that means for customers who are thinking, there's always a discretionary bit for a money transfer. So, people are sending that little bit of extra money because the rate is looking pretty good at the moment. What else do I think? Obviously we all know that it's almost impossible to aggregate market data. We all operate where it's hundreds and hundreds of corridors. Each of them a separate market, each of them separate competitive dynamics. I think probably talking to other, market participants, I've seen that, the three large money transfer regions, sending regions in the world, East to West, the Gulf, the GCC, Europe, and then North America, really. And you can argue that Asia is coming up, and that's going to be another one soon. But those are the three big ones. I think the GCC has had a terrible time, and I talk to people in those markets, and it has been decimated. But they've really had a double black swan. So not only have they been dealing with COVID, they've been dealing with a very low oil price, an oil price shock, which has made it really difficult. And actually, a lot of the migrant population there, when things get bad, they just go home. And actually, so the market for remittances out of the GCC has shrunk dramatically. There's also been some interesting market dynamics. Finabler, obviously, going bust. There's been interesting stuff happening out of the GCC. So a lot of the decline you can see globally, and a lot of the decline that was in the World Bank numbers, I think is more pronounced in the GCC. North America, I'm not so sure. It's not my market. I think Gene and Cruz will be a much better place to opine. But in Europe, at least what we're seeing is there's a huge amount that governments are doing to try and keep people's wages going. So we have in the UK, we have something called a furlough scheme. Pretty much every country in which we operate across Europe has got some kind of scheme whereby the government are paying people to either they're paying companies to keep people employed, or they're increasing the level of income support. And that's pretty widely available. I know in the US it's restricted to certain members of society and not always available freely to migrants. But in Europe, people tend to be able to access those funds. So actually the economic pain that you'd expect to be to come with a decline of economic activity of the scale that we've seen has not actually happened yet. So, people are still earning more money. And actually, if you look at things like credit card debt in Europe, people are paying off their credit cards at the moment. They actually have more cash than they used to do because they're not going out and spending discretionary income. So actually, people's cash position hasn't really, on average, is actually much better than it used to be. And we see those fiscal supports potentially continuing. We think there's going to be some economic pain when they sort of start to taper off. The UK is talking about stopping its economic fiscal stimulus at the end of this quarter. The Germans have actually said they're going to continue to support workers' incomes for another year. So there's the economic pain that maybe you saw in the last financial crisis. And I ran a big business out of Spain all the way through that crisis. And that was probably one of the hardest times of my professional career. Uno and Universal, as we were going through that. There was a complete decline in people's incomes. That just hasn't happened yet. I'm not saying it won't happen, but generally, people have been shielded from the very worst of this crisis at the moment. Unemployment levels haven't spiked in the same way they have in America, so that's kind of why we think it's not as bad as we maybe feared, and not as bad as Dilip told us it would be. And then, of course, the third thing, and anyone who's worked in this industry knows this, have an incredible amount of respect for our customers. These are the brightest and best who get off their backsides and, get on a plane to travel halfway across the world, leave behind their support networks, leave behind their friends, leave behind their families in order to build a better life for themselves and their loved ones. And, these are not people who are going to give up and let, the lack of a job or, difficult times stop them doing what they have really, traveled halfway across the world to do. And, I just always say, never bet against our customers. This is, I would bet a lot against a lot of other things before I bet against our customers. And when we talk to them, and what they tell us is that this is not discretionary spend. Even if they're out of a job, even if money is tight, this money that's going home is more important to them than anything else. So, the resilience of remittance flows is huge, and has surprised me again just how much our customers prioritize the money that they send back home. People are not eating as regularly. They are, they're really going without personally in order to continue to send this money, because they know that, no matter how bad it is in the UK or Spain or Germany or France or Italy or any of our big markets, things are really tough back home, and they know that the money makes a difference. So those would be my sort of broad reflections, but happy to answer any questions.
Great. Michael, thank you very much. And yes, I want to add that resilience played a big role in why remittances didn't fall that low in the 2008-2009 crisis. And anecdotally, here in the United States, I've talked to companies and agents who just are saying that some of their customers are even if they were laid off, for example, in Miami from hotels, they're doing other jobs. I mean, you're a migrant, you just need to work. You don't sit at home waiting for unemployment. You just find whatever they can do. And some of them are doing deliveries, and some of them are just doing other jobs. Even companies that have laid off some employees and they're taking doing new things. They're hiring migrants to fill some of the gaps, or do it just because they're trying something different. So yes, there's a resilience there, and you work so hard to get to here, that won't slow you down. And Michael, thank you very much for bringing that up, because that's important, and that creates the difference in why migrants, even if unemployment grows, they just look at other sources of income, anything that they can find.
Yeah, they hustle.
Yeah, the hustlers, yes. Okay, so Gene, it's your turn. Tell us what's on your mind. What do you think? What you've seen? I have some questions on the chat that I will ask after Gene gives us his general comments. Thank you, Gene, for being with us.
Thanks. My general comments is that something that we also need to discuss is the shift that's taking place in the industry from offline to online. And I'm sure that most of you listen to the earnings release of MoneyGram and Western Union. And when you listen to Hickman, for example, he talks about how the industry is moving from offline to online. But the challenge that in the case of Western Union, I think that they're having is that even though they're growing very fast, the online part of the business, that cannot offset the decline from the traditional business, the offline. The other thing that we need to take into account is that you have a lot of companies, all over the world, the mom and pops, that they want to get into the online business, but the online business is not easy. It's a very complicated business. Just because you have a website, that doesn't mean that you're going to generate transactions. You have to advertise the service, you have to build your brand, and you have to have the compliance controls, you have to have the risk controls, you have to have the engineering to build the system. Just by hiring a marketing manager, you're not going to do it. and just having the website. And the other thing that I'm seeing that is happening in the industry is what Michael was saying at the beginning of his remarks, is that data points that we got from the World Bank in March. We were expecting that the world was going to crash for the remittance business, and the opposite happened. And I think that the reason is that there might be a couple of reasons, and I don't have any data points, I'm speculating, is that people are working 2 or 3 jobs to support their families back home. And that is something that they deserve a lot of credits. And the other thing that's happening is that because of the pricing points of offline and online, they're moving to offline. You know, when you send off online, it's a lot cheaper than when you send off online. For example, if you're sending, let's say Guatemala, as an assumption, any company is charging $9.99. Most remittance companies, they charge, you know, there's a company right now that they just dropped the prices. They came down to $2.99 to send to Guatemala. The FX is quite competitive. And then you have the other usual suspects. So what's happening is that the customer is now, like as always they do, they're looking for better fees, better effects, and better service. The service that they are expecting has to be perfect. Because if you have a little bit of friction when you're online and you have a new customer, the customer does the first transaction, there is a lot of anxiety when they're trying to use a new service that is online, that they don't go to the store and they talk to someone. This is only in the web. So the service when we, a remittance company online, acquire a new customer has to be perfect. And that's a big difference. At instant, that's something else. The service has to be instant. And that's what, if we give our customers the security that they are going to be able to receive their funds, being in Ethiopia, being in Brazil, or anywhere in the world, in seconds, because the reality is that we all, you know, we compete, but we're also good friends, but we also use the same payers. So what's the value proposition? And the value proposition that offline offer versus offline companies is the speed of the service, the security, and also the much competitive fees. When we're talking about the global markets, like in the Philippines, I think that Cruz talked about that early in his remarks. In the Philippines, the seafarers market, of the global market to the Philippines about 37, 38 billion, ballpark. 5 billion are from the seafarers. That market just went away because all the cruise lines are grounded, and the cargo ships are not grounded, but there's a lot less work. But at the same time, the Philippine markets keep growing with everything that's going on. What I think that's happening is that people that used to work in the cruise ships, they're going into different countries and they're finding jobs and they keep sending money home. You also have the case of Mexico or the case of Guatemala. Guatemala last month, they grew almost 10% year over year. And Guatemala is dependent in the US. We talk about the US, that the crisis, the world is ending. Yes, we have a lot of problems. There's no question about that. The economy, yes, is in bad shape. Just this morning, there was an announcement by the Department of the Treasury about 900,000 more people, they lost their jobs. But the immigrants, they keep sending money. So why is that? Same thing with Mexico. According to Banxico, Mexico has been growing since March. Why is that? Because people have the commitment to support their families. The commitment. And that's the reason why this industry, against all odds, today continues to grow. Happy to answer any questions or to elaborate in any of the points.
Yes, you know, I know that Gene and of course Michael too, they're digital companies, and Gene is a big advocate of digital. And every time that I speak in events or roundtables like that, I have to always talk about the agent, and then people make jokes about how I don't see the change happening. Of course, the change is happening. I do talk a lot with agents because their place, the place they play in the industry is large. Is like the little consulates for migrants, the place where they can go and talk, and it's amazing, really, the things that agents have been doing to stop or at least curb the move to digital. It's unbelievable the ways they have devised to get serve their customers, even if they cannot go to their stores. And regulation doesn't help really, because and banks don't help because they restrict maybe deposit to bank accounts of agents, et cetera. But they're being very, very creative to be able to stay themselves. I know that many agents will probably don't make it through the pandemic. Most money transfer, cash transfer agents are decreasing the revenue they have from remittances as prices become more competitive. And some of them are not going to make it, and some of them are making it because they're doing other services. They're multi-services. And from South Florida, the amount of packaging has increased tremendously, something that also surprised me. And because I've been spending some time with packaging just to find out things that are happening are amazing. Like, people sending food to countries where they never sent before, like Colombia, and through packaging. Packaging is inexpensive for certain areas in South Florida, because most of the shipment of flowers, et cetera, come from Latin America to the United States, and then most of those planes leave empty, so they are willing to lower the price of cargo. So shipping is rather inexpensive. So yes, there is this movement, and some of the questions are here is that
Hugo, one more point, something just clicked. What
yes.
also Western Union and MoneyGram are going to have or are having is channel conflict. Channel conflict, all the agents, let's say here in South Florida or in Washington, D.C., the supermarkets, the Publix, the Giants, the Safeways, they charge more than when they do it online.
Yes. Yeah.
So the agent, I hate to say it, but the traditional agent business is going to change a lot in the next 2 years.
And it's true, Gene, and it's changing. Some of the, for example, some of the large chains of agents, so a company that, let's say, that is an agent but has 20 locations, 30 locations, 40 locations, because they do other services, they are thinking, what am I going to do? And some of them are even questioning, should I partner with a company that can give me white label, so I can also move my clients to digital and I don't lose them. So there are solutions coming in place for this agent networks to be part of the digital economy in some way or another. It is happening. It's not easy at all. You have to have one agent by itself will not make it. And if it depends on money transfers, it won't make it. I've been saying that to some agents and companies that are doing money transfers. And as I said, years ago, they could be 75% of their income revenue coming from money transfers. Even agents that have 3,000 transactions, it is maybe the revenue is 20-25% of the store is for money transfer. So they're going to be more pressure on the agents. That's true. That's definitely true. I agree with you, Gene, on that. But I always say that when I'm in an agent looking at how they react to someone saying, well, I just sent it online, and they said the immediate reaction of the agent, you know what it is? Oh, it was bad. It wasn't it? Of course, they don't want to lose their customers. And did you really check the change it? Because they fool you, It changes by the minute. Things like that. They are just fighting for their own piece of property there. But we agree there's a shift. So let me. There's a question here that says, during this hard shift to digital, what will be your advice to older generations who are not ready nor skill ready for this digital change. Michael, did you hear the question? Should I repeat it?
I think you said,
yeah,
what?
for the older generation, and everything that is happening to cash is impacting much more the older generations, that they just, and what is your feeling there, or what have you seen? Because we also have seen that certain migrants for certain countries, because they're more tech savvy or because they're younger, the shift is faster. What do you have to say about in that sense, Michael?
I mean, well, just a few pieces of indicative data. So the average age of an Azimo customer versus a Small World customer, which is my old business, is about 3 or 4 years younger. It's not hugely different, but yeah, the users of digital seem to skew a bit younger. But actually, we've seen of the recently arrived cohorts. So we talk about cohorts of people who are acquired in a certain month, have actually skewed a little bit older. So lockdown seems to have seen a transition of people who are perhaps a little bit harder to get into a digital environment, simply because they didn't want to go out. And also, I think older users, certainly in Europe, are deemed to be at much higher risk of the pandemic. So actually, you've seen people who are still, scared to go out or scared to go out onto the high street and interact tend to be a bit older. So I mean, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's I think you can be a little bit patronizing to the older generation, and most of them at this point know how to use a smartphone. Most of them are on WhatsApp, most of them on Skype or whatever else. So we try and make our digital tools very, very easy to use, and then we have a huge investment, and I know Remitly do too, in customer support, so that if people are having trouble or want to set up their first transaction, we allow them to call in and really get sort of blow by blow support for how it works. But yeah, always getting that first transaction on a new provider. Even if you're an agent business, actually, the first transaction with a new supplier or a new network is always difficult. You've got to get your ID out and do all the rest of the KYC and stuff. So we spend a lot of time investing on how we can make that easier. I don't think cash is going to go away overnight. I think it will continue to diminish. It's still the majority of the market in Europe. People, if you look at remittances, more people send it from, high street locations than don't, still. And that's, how long have Zoom been going? What, 12 years, 14 years, something like that? So, we're still, these revolutions that people talk about take a lot longer than people think. Even if you look at e-commerce, which is, it's been going on for 20 years now, and Amazon being one of the most valuable companies in the world, it's still only, the whole of e-commerce is still less than 30% of all retail. So I think there's going to be cash alternatives for people for a long time. I also think the younger generation have a responsibility to help other people. I taught my mum how to shop on Amazon. I taught her how to use WhatsApp to call the grandchildren, and but if you can actually save them some money, and we've all got an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, that's true. There's a question here that I'm going to ask also you, Michael. The outlook for GCC remittances. Let's say I was going to say post-pandemic, but it's not going. Yeah, I think the post-pandemic is not going to be a date forward. But what do you think? Put your magic hat and say, what do you think is going to happen with the GCC?
I think it's an incredibly flexible economy, and two things. One is I think they've been very, very good at managing the pandemic. So if you actually, the UAE have the highest level of testing outside of China. They are throwing everything at this. And they're not discriminating. Migrants get very well tested. Citizens get very well tested. So I think they're doing their very best to contain the pandemic. I don't know what's going to happen to the oil price. If I did, I'd be sitting on my yacht rather than talking to you guys. So unfortunately, but I can see that economy, as things start to bounce back, have come roaring back. And, there are hundreds of thousands of migrants, particularly in the Indian subcontinent, who can't wait to get back to the GCC and, get working. So I think if it's hard to know what's going to happen on, to those economies, but I think they're controlling the health side of the pandemic pretty well. And, assuming there'll be an economic recovery reasonably fast, I think it will happen. I think the leverage point at that point will mean that the remittances recover. You've got to remember that remittances from that part of the world are some of the most efficient anywhere. The prices are some of the lowest because the corridors are so concentrated that, remittances from Saudi Arabia, the largest market, UAE, Kuwait, they work really well. So, that's there's reason to be hopeful, but I think it's going to be a few years before it gets back to where it was.
Yes, thank you. One question for Gene. The issue of illegal migrants, we shouldn't call them like that, but let's say in the United States, the access to being able to send money digitally because of lack of government ID from the United States. There's questions about that. What can you tell us on that?
Can you elaborate on the question?
So for example, if I don't have a government ID of the United States and I want to send money, do I have problems to access some of the digital platforms because of that? Because of the KYC requirements?
Well, it depends on the remittance company, but because each company has different type of compliance controls. But what we have seen is that the immigrants in the U.S. When they have an ID, a U.S. government issue ID, or like a matrícula consular from Mexico, they can go and open an account.
Yes.
And once they have a bank account, they can do transactions online, because there's a lot of misconceptions about how difficult it is to open a bank account. But I have seen in California, Wells Fargo. If you go into a Wells Fargo branch with a matrícula consular, you can go ahead and open your bank account.
Yes. And I want to say, good. Matrícula consular is an ID that Mexicans, Guatemalans do. I have one. You can get in your consulate, and it's just an ID, and a lot of companies are accepting that ID because it's issued in the United States. So some other countries have considered doing that, and just to help their migrants from their countries, just open an account and at least show an ID to show who they are. And so to the person who asked that question, that is happening. It's not general for every country. Migrants even without a government ID or anything, they live in communities and families where someone has an ID, and probably that's the person who's sending the money. That happens too. It is what it is. You always find a way to do that. There is other questions, was I think we answered some of those. Is the question about the average of transactions. What has been happening with the average of transactions? Gene, you think it's stable, it's dropping because of the pandemic?
It depends on the corridor. And even when you talk about corridors, let's say from the US to Mexico, the principal might be different if you're sending from New York than if you're sending from Wichita, Kansas. But the overall numbers are stable. The PPT, the principal per transaction, is stable. But there are differences on the corridor. Because the principal going to Mexico is different than, for example, the principal going to the Philippines or the principal going to Kenya. Is very different. The other thing that we're seeing is, and it's not about the principal, is the movement to mobile wallets as a payout of transactions. The industry is changing. You go to East Africa, for example, what I call the M-Pesa countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. Most of the volumes of most remittances companies, they go into mobile wallets. You go into some countries, you go into the Philippines, for example, GCash and PayMaya, they're exploding, they're growing very, very fast. You go into Indonesia, you see the same thing. So the point is that the industry is changing, and this comes back to the previous questions about what happened with all their senders. And I think that what all remittance companies are doing is we do a lot of segmentation. And the way how you treat different customers, depending on the age bracket, has to be different. But it's very difficult to get done. It's not something that is simple.
Michael, you want to add something about that, about average transaction?
Yeah, I mean, we watch it very closely. Yeah, of course, they're all different. And, you know, the ATV, we call it, average transaction value is, and median transaction value as well is an important one. We've watched very carefully. I think what we haven't seen is what we did see in 2007, 2008 was so certainly out of Spain, which was probably the market I knew best through that period, but also for most of Europe, that we saw quite a big decline in average transaction value, you know, like 20 to 25%. And actually that really hurts. The transaction numbers were largely the same, but actually the ATV went down quite substantially. And that obviously that hits your revenue a lot, and it was difficult. And what we put that down to the fact that people were still sending, they're still sending every month or still sending every, you know, twice a month, but they were sending less because they had less money. We haven't seen that yet. So we haven't seen a decline. We haven't seen an increase either. So a few people have told me that they've seen a bit of an increase because of the decline in the foreign exchange rates of the country that they're sending to. So, you know, actually now would be a good time to send that little bit of extra money. We haven't really seen that, but ATVs, average transaction values for us have been very stable. I think, you know, I think if things get worse in the economy, you'll probably see the same as we saw in 2007, 2008, which is a decline in average transaction value, which really reflects the fact that people still have to send, they just send less money.
Yeah.
I think digital generally, and if you make it easy to send, people tend to send smaller amounts, more frequently. So I think in the industry, we're having to get our heads around people sending, you know, almost, if you think about letters, you wrote one a week. If you think about emails, you wrote maybe, I don't know, 10 a day. And if you think about WhatsApp messages, you probably send, 10 a minute or 10 an hour. So it's a similar sort of thing. If you make the money flow really, really quick and easy, you don't have to go to a store. You don't have to queue up. You can send $10 or $20. I think that's actually a trend that we expect to see across the whole industry, where the number of transactions goes up, but the average transaction value goes down. But as a result of the pandemic, we haven't really seen a huge shift.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful. Thank you. Cruz, we don't want you to be sitting along. We've discussed, you and me, we discussed about data for quite a while. And Michael started his comments by talking about the data that comes from the World Bank, and we understand that, and I think he mentioned Dilip. We understand the work that World Bank has done, and this is really the best data around. Also, the World Bank has been doing work on pricing with the Remittance Prices Worldwide website, which gives us those estimates. Now, digital has all these price comparison tools that let you compare, and I go just look at them just to see what is the tendency there. But we agree that there is much more need for data. I've been part of this new network, which is called IRM, with the scholars and practitioners and students trying to build this international network. And they are also very concerned about data because that's where they work, and they use data to be able to do their research and publish papers and books about it. Tell me a little bit, Cruz, where do you see the gaps not only for the public in general, but let's say for the companies in this industry. Tell me a little bit about that. We have a little bit of time left, not much, but I want to give you the opportunity because this is your field and this is the field you've been working for quite some time.
No, absolutely. And I think Michael touched on it a little bit earlier about how really difficult it is to really consolidate industry data just overall, right? And the World Bank certainly has its challenges. And even if you do it individually in your organization, you're going to find those challenges as well. How do you gather, how do you collect this data from competitors, for example, right? And so there's an absolute need in the industry. There's an absolute gap here to try to, for an entity, ideally a nonprofit entity that would be able to consolidate aggregates from all the competitors to really have sort of a non-biased view for how the industry is doing, for how the corridors are moving along. And so I think there's a need that hopefully can be resolved, soon, and then soon, especially as being involved with sort of the methodology of how organizations, for example, gather competitive pricing would be an important example of how even exchange rate, how the tools that are generally out there, they may not be as sort of real time as one would hope them to be, especially if you're trying to compete, for example, on exchange rate, making sure that the data is really available real time makes significant difference. If you're trying to make a decision today whether, hey, should I adjust my exchange rate strategy or not within the next 10 minutes or so, then being able to have this readily available data in a consumable way is something that is not entirely present. And that if you want to build individually in your organization, it requires a lot of time and effort. So I see an opportunity for somebody to come in.
Yeah, and you were telling me also in the talks we've been having is how traditional companies, even agent cash-based companies, don't really use or manage their data as they could, because digital companies just were built on data. That's what they know, and we've seen from the comments Michael, for example, has given us. I mean, data and following data is so important for digital companies. For traditional companies, it is so. They just probably don't do it as efficiently. My point of view, maybe I'm mistaken. I'm not taking one case. I'm just talking about it generally. I want to mention something before we go. First, I have to thank you, guys. It's been great. Thank you for our listeners. We have some questions that we have not answered, but thank you. I think it's very, very informative. We'll be watching. You know that we just announced that we're going to have our event in November virtually. So we're going to have some discussions like this, plus other things that we're trying to do, because we want to make a very entertaining event. Even if we cannot be together, the ones that have been coming for many years to our event in November, maybe many people that cannot come because maybe their companies don't bring them. Maybe that's the first time they're going to be able to feel the INTC spirit. So we welcome you. Also, we're going to do the RemTech Awards, which is our innovation awards. And we are very happy this year. We have a number of almost 30 participants. And I think we have one of our deadlines coming very soon. So thank you very much. Samia, we're in your hands now. And thank you, Cruz. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Gene. And thank you all the participants.
Well, I would like to thank you for joining this virtual roundtable. I hope you've enjoyed this interesting discussion in our amazing panelists. And I hope to see you in INTC World 2020 to be in our new virtual experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Remember,